Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session. I've forgotten what it's titled, but it's something about the big vision that Frank McCourt has for how to make me less depressed about the future of democracy. I think that was the title that we requested. So I'm going to be interviewing, but we'll have a conversation with Frank McCourt. So my name is John Haidt. I'm a professor at New York University Stern School of Business. I study moral psychology, political polarization. Frank McCourt, born and raised in Boston, joined his family's business, started in 1893, real estate, construction development, went off on his own in 1978, started a range of businesses, got involved in telecommunications, real estate, sports, so broad knowledge of the way the world works and how to change things. He endowed the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University because of his concerns about what was happening to American democracy. And as he'll tell you, then a number of years later, things are getting a lot worse, and he had some big ideas about what needs to change about social media and the internet. And so our conversation will be geared towards helping you understand what this big vision is. Now, I met Frank about like 5 or 6 weeks ago. Soon after my Atlantic article came out, I wrote this article titled "Everything is Doomed Because of Social Media," something like that, in the Atlantic. And Frank read it, and while he wanted to talk to me about it, we had this brief meeting in Washington Square Park where I laid out why I think the trends are so bad for this country and how I don't think we have 10 years to work on this. I think we're going over a cliff, and we've got to make major changes in the next 2 to 4 years, I believe. So I laid out this very pessimistic vision. And Frank, while he resonated with it and he shared my concerns, he actually was much more optimistic because he could see a way forward. He could see what we have to do and do soon. And that's what I want to bring out today to you here in the audience. So to set it up, so here's I think, a productive way to think about what's happening to our country. Our brains are very good at thinking about mechanical systems. There's a complicated clock, and it used to work, but now it's broken. And, well, let's find the gear, or let's find the problem and fix it. Okay, we're good at thinking about that. But most interesting social science problems are not like that. They're complex dynamical systems, like the economy, or the weather, or a nervous breakdown, or other things that we can't visualize it. There's no good metaphor. But the general metaphor used in classrooms to portray it is imagine a sort of a landscape, like a topography with hills and valleys. This represents the universe of all possible states that our country could be in. And right now we're here, imagine like a ball on this landscape in a pit. It's very hard to get out of this pit. It's a pit with all of our problems, our polarization, our distrust. That's where we are. Now, sometime in the future, things are going to be better. I do believe that. There is surely a future in which American democracy is so much better because of technology, because of the internet and social media. We thought in the 90s that that's where we were headed. But now it's clear, no, the internet and social media have actually put us into this pit. And so the way you think about it in complex dynamical systems is how do we get from here to there when there's a big hill in between, and you can't push the ball all the way up this hill. We don't even know how high it is. It might be miles high. It might be impossible. So what you do instead is you think about how do we change parameters so that the landscape changes, so that we're not going from a deep pit up over a high mountain, so that the pit is less deep and the mountain is shorter. That's how you change society. You change parameters, and then a social movement could be successful. No social movement, just the people demanding change, is going to fix our democracy this year. The pit is too deep. How do we get from here to there? That's what Frank is going to talk to us about. So, Frank, tell us the story. You've been speaking about this in many fora, and you've developed this way of speaking, like telling the story of America as a progression from Web 1 to Web 2 to Web 3. And a lot of people might not even know what those terms mean. But so just what is the story of America that you are now trying to get involved in and fix the mistake we made?
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, welcome. Good morning, everyone, and nice to be with you, Jonathan. So, yeah, it's interesting to have been a part of this evolution of technology, right? From so-called Internet 1.0 or Web 1.0, which came upon us in the 90s with all this promise, this highly decentralized technology that was going to democratize things and create lots of opportunity and access. And then Web 2.0 emerged, and suddenly this decentralized awesome thing was highly centralized, and all this data that we're all producing was vacuumed up by a few large companies.
And around what year? Like, give the people context. What year, and what was the change that led to Web 2?
Yeah, Web 2, the big change really was the World Wide Web. So a protocol called HTTP, which we all adopted. Probably none of us were asked, do we want to adopt it or not? We just did, because it was cool and we were all connected and so forth. So the World Wide Web combined with the arrival of mobile smart devices. Those were the two things that suddenly changed the way the internet worked, and suddenly this awesome decentralized thing, which connected all of us, became highly centralized, with each of our data, the so-called social graph, being vacuumed up by a few very, very large companies where they control our data, and they apply algorithms to the data and so forth for commercial and other purposes. So what this idea of this awesome, interconnected world suddenly became dystopian, because now our data was extracted, exploited, monetized, used in permissionless ways, and now we even see it weaponized. So it's become a big problem. So Web 3, which is happening on the horizon, holds the promise of resetting the internet and resetting how all this works. And we'll, I'm sure, talk about that in a moment or two, but I just wanted to highlight a single point about Web 3. Web 3 is not a bunch of dodgy cryptocurrencies and useless NFTs. Think of those as the worthless applications that occurred in 1999 and 2000 during the nascent days of Web 2.0. There were lots of, remember the dot-com boom and bust? Think of this moment we're in now as the same boom and bust cycle, because first movers oftentimes are those who are speculating. It's kind of a gold rush mentality. So they're speculating, and they're just doing things and getting people all hyped up over these things.
But let's make clear, Web 3 is possible because of blockchain. I think what Frank is saying is blockchain is the technological development that can change everything, but most of us have only heard of blockchain from cryptocurrency, so don't get distracted by that. But blockchain is the key to Web 3, right?
It is, yeah, and like all technologies, it takes time to scale. It takes time to be affordable. It takes time to be energy efficient. You've also heard a lot of things about, blockchain will never work because it's not scalable. Blockchain is energy inefficient. It's bad for the environment. It's true that early blockchains were very clunky. It was also true that Web 1.0, which some of you might remember, having to plug in, plug in a modem and type in all kinds of numbers, and that was really clunky. But what happens is tech evolves, and user experience evolves, and then suddenly we all use it. It's interesting, it connects us, it does lots of things. What we didn't know was this so-called free apps were actually taking our data and doing stuff with it, right? And we bent it away from a democratized, really interesting, really full of possibility internet to one that was highly commercialized. And now we're learning more about how these algorithms actually understand not just our preferences and what we might like to where we might like to shop, or what clothes we might like, or where we may want to go on holiday, but actually making judgments about our personality, our emotional makeup, what will trigger behaviors. So what we saw on January 6th, for instance, was behavior triggered at scale. Now I'm married, right? And I know how to trigger my wife, right? And she knows how to trigger me. We don't do it because we want to stay married. Imagine triggering society at scale. And this is what technology is, just a tool. It optimizes for something that human beings say, let's have it optimized for X or Y. If you optimize for rage, you get rage. If you optimize for democracy, you get democracy. We have, in Web 2.0, we have optimized for the wrong things. So this is, to me, the key of Web3 is, yes, blockchain is this incredible technology, this powerful nascent technology, but it's also an opportunity for us to reset how things work, now knowing the power and promise of the internet. When the internet came along, I think it's fair to say that very few understood the power of the internet and what was going to be unleashed. So I think we all get a mulligan.
Yeah.
But I don't think we get a second one. We now know what the internet is capable of. We have a moment where technology is resetting, and now is the moment for us to take advantage of resetting how the internet works, knowing now how powerful it is.
So Frank's story and his timing syncs up perfectly with the story that I told in my Atlantic article, because we had this period of enormous techno-democratic optimism, which peaked in 2011. From the late 90s to 2011, we thought, democracy is going to win. Liberal democracy is the only viable system. If we just let, the Chinese and the Russians get rich, then they'll want liberal democracy too. And in 2011, the year begins with the Arab Spring. And we think, what dictator can stand up to people empowered by Facebook and other apps and portable phones? And it ends with the global Occupy movement. We think that this technology, this Web 2 technology, is going to bring down high inequality, power to the people, we thought. But then everything went wrong in the 2010s. And there's been a sharp drop in the number of democracies in the late 2010s and in the quality of the remaining democracies. So we have a democratic catastrophe. It's most severe in our country, but it's happening in many other countries. It's not just us. And so this is why when Frank and I met in the park, and I was all doom and gloom because I just thought it was like things looked like they were good and now they're going down, Frank put it in this narrative form like, yes, they're going down because that's what Web 2 has done to us. But I have an idea for Web 3. So now if you can do it, it's hard to explain. What is Project Liberty? What is your vision for an alternate future based on blockchain that would be good for democracy? Yeah,
before I talk about Project Liberty, I want to make sure you all, I want to share with you where I'm coming from. So as Jonathan mentioned, I grew up in Boston, big Irish Catholic family, one of 7. And so 9 minimum at the dinner table, often guests and friends and so forth. So kind of picture that, kind of an unruly board meeting every night, and very siblings with very liberal, others conservatives. So lots of discussion, lots of ideas, and we were very good. Me and my brothers and sisters at identifying problems, so we would, we could say that's wrong and this is wrong. And before every dinner was out, I would hear the voice of my mom saying, that's great. Now, what are you going to do about it? So Project Liberty is a what are you going to do about it project. Secondly, I'm the steward of a 5-generation-old business. I want the business to be around for another 5 generations. I'm worried that it won't be. And not just our business, but many. Because the 2 operating systems we have in society, a political operating system and an economic one, are both founded on trust, right? Our democracy and our capitalism. I don't see a possible way forward, and this is where we share a concern, that democracy, or capitalism for that matter, survive without trust. And we have destroyed it, or it's in the process of being destroyed, and because of how technology is being used. Remember, it's just a tool, and it's being used now in ways that are highly destructive for democracy. So what if we could change the way the internet works? What if there was another protocol that dictated how the internet worked? Remember, it just works because there are protocols that says it works this way. So what if there was another protocol that decentralized the social graph? The social graph is just our data, right? And how we communicate with others. Right now, it's atomized. We each have it, billions of these social graphs sucked up by a few entities. What if the social graph was a universal graph, a public resource, part of the public part of the internet? We all had ownership and control of our data within that public resource. And rather than click on these absurd cookies giving permission to these apps to have our data and do whatever they want with it, it was reversed, and the new apps that get created in Web 3 have to agree to our terms. for how the data is used, for what purpose and on what terms. And that's the tech component of Project Liberty, right? And a protocol called DSNP, Decentralized Social Networking Protocol, which has been created and gifted. It's open source. And that, combined with Web3, could create a very, very different future. But Project Liberty is not a tech project. It has two other tracks. One is a governance track, one is a movement track. So I think it's very important to think about change, cultural shift, needs to happen from us, from all of us. We can't let technologists go solve the technological problem that they've created.
Right.
We need to solve the problem. We need to decide as citizens, as society, how do we want the technology to work? Again, think of it as a hammer. Yeah. You can take the hammer, we can go out and build a home, or we can take the hammer and go out and kill someone. Right now, we're killing people. We're killing democracy, right? And so let's create a tool that's a public utility. And let's, at the same time, recreate the social contract, which when you eliminate trust, you destroy the social contract, which is societal trust, right? Which has allowed democracy and democracies to flourish. Right now, the social contract is being destroyed. We need a new social contract, which is the governance track of liberty. And then, of course, people need to get involved, because it doesn't matter how great DSNP is or how great Web3 is. It's just tech. And there's no guarantee it's going to fix things. It may make things worse, right? Because it's more powerful technology, et cetera, et cetera. We need to get engaged and really insist that the technology work differently. And so the movement track of liberty is incredibly important. So
in a functioning country, you would have, government would see a new technology coming in, and as happened with radio and television, there was a recognition, and we have a capitalist system, there's a recognition that we're not going to be like Britain, where there's going to just be government control of everything. But at the same time, they did things, I don't know the history, I'm sure you do, but the government did things. They created the FCC. They did things that it could be used in the public interest. And ideally, that would happen now, but clearly that's just not going to happen. Am I right in saying that because government is not really going to be doing much, you call this a movement? It's not just a tech project; it's a movement. So what is the path forward? Especially what we have here are people who are, well, elites in different institutions. I can't see the masses of people holding up signs on the street saying, "We demand DSNP." But how, what is the plan for change that brings in journalists and people in the corporate world and people in the political, what's the path forward?
Yeah, I see. It's kind of a two-part question. I'll talk about the government piece second and the movement piece first. It's not getting people to walk around with banners saying, use DSNP. It's actually getting people who are already making movements, who are part of movements, giving them a tool to make their movement more successful. So think of it more as campaign than movement. And campaigns connect movements, existing movements. There are a lot of people out there, as you know better than I, doing really marvelous things, wonderful things. But they're doing it actually with technology that's actually undermining their goals. It's actually not helping solve the problems at scale. So imagine, again, a tool, technology being used in a totally different way to actually unify all of the great people and movements and things that are happening in a very healthy way in order to actually affect change in all the areas we're concerned about, well beyond technology. We could talk all day about these other issues. But if we don't solve this technological issue, I don't know how we get to solve the other issues, because again, at the end of the day, democracies are based on our ability to communicate in a trusted fashion and collaborate. Right now, there is very little trusted communication, and collaboration is also not celebrated right now, right? There's a lot of separating. There's a lot and the technology is largely to blame for this. As far as the governmental piece of this, I just saw Michael somewhere who came up and introduced himself, and he ran one of our telecom companies back in the 90s. And I'll give you just a very concrete example of how government can help. In the 90s, we started a telecom when the internet was nascent, 1993. And we were the first ever in the world to bundle. Everybody bundles now. That means you get your phone, you get your TV, and you get your internet from the same provider. We built brand new fiber optics in major cities in America, broadband, high speed. It was very, very awesome. And we offered one service provider. Interestingly, when people came to sign up, there was a friction point, and that was they wanted their phone number because they liked their phone number. Their parents,
They've
kids,
memorized
friends,
it.
and it's their number. But we said, sorry, we can't give you the phone number because the oligarchs of the time say they own your phone number. The baby bells all said, we own the number. It's how they kept you as a customer, right? In 1996, the Telecommunications Act was passed. Phone number portability was a feature of the Telecommunications Act. Our company and many others started to grow and flourish. Think of now this as data portability, not phone number portability. The idea of interoperating. These 7 baby bells all figured out how to get our phone number to work between each of them. That's interoperability. But the ownership of the number was this idea of who owns and controls the resource. So imagine your data is owned and controlled by you. You can talk between carriers or apps, use cases, and you decide. And so you're not in a walled garden, like you must use Verizon to have, and the person you're talking to must use Verizon or Facebook. Imagine they talk to each other, just like it doesn't matter whether you have Verizon and I have AT&T and you have Sprint or T-Mobile. It's how it evolves. That's how government can help. I'm not a, and I think, by the way, regulators are doing the best they can, trying to regulate these unprecedentedly large entities, but I just don't believe that regulation and governments, which are designed to move methodically at a deliberate speed for good reason, are ever going to keep up with a move fast and break things mentality of technology. So I think we have to innovate our way forward, and then there'll be a moment in time for policymakers to really level that playing field, just like they did in 1996.
So there are moments when I listen to Frank, there are moments when I sort of see a glimpse of the far future, and then it vanishes and I lose it. But when Frank was talking about like people building movements and it depends on trust, so it occurred to me there are a lot of people here, like people involved in the Weave project with David Brooks or any other project. Raise your hand if you are in any way involved in a project that is movement building. You have a lot of members. Raise your hand. Okay, just call it out. Who's represented? Just call out your organization. What? Weave. Who else? Accelerate Games, okay. Any other?
No labels.
No labels, great. And I run Heterodox Academy, an organization of professors. So there are a lot of people who are doing movement building. And you said something like, a lot of us we use email, there are Facebook groups, there's Twitter. We use all these Web 2 technologies, and they help us in many ways, but especially some of them, public facing like Twitter, also cause enormous problems. What would it look like in 5 to 10 years if DSMP is really implemented and there are applications that people can use instead of the Web 2 ones? What would it look like? How would Weave or No Labels or how would they be better off in this new ecosystem?
Okay, I'll give you just 2 examples. One would be economic, and the other is just I'll pick media, because you're in the media, I'm sure many of you are.
Okay. And then just in about 5 minutes, we're going to go to audience questions. So please formulate questions. We'll have about 10 minutes for conversation with you.
So, so I think important to think about, and this is something that was drummed home in me by our technologists, is that Web 2.0 is an internet of data. And we've talked a lot about data. Web 3 is an internet of data and value. So it's a different set of possibilities, because in Web 3, you'll have a wallet, which is essentially your browser, and you'll be able to communicate directly with others. So it's going to unleash and enable a tremendous amount of economic activity and empower people. Imagine if just half of the value that's been created by the top 5 big tech companies was actually distributed to the users. That's what a decentralized internet allows. It's the ability for the users to interact directly and benefit economically. Your data has value. In Web 3, there's a way to capture the value. In Web 2, there isn't that way because all of the data is scraped up, accumulated, and then owned by and controlled by these 5 platforms. So one example is, categorically, is that the economics of Web 3 are fundamentally different and incredibly enabling, empowering, and creating a true shared economy. I mentioned media just as an example. So think about the world before the internet, when we had traditional media, and we would all, had access to all kinds of, let's say, newspapers. One of those was the National Enquirer, right? Others were the New York Times and the Financial Times and the Guardian and the Wall Street Journal, and pick your favorite, most reliable. So, and most people, I believe, looked at the National Enquirer not as real news. It was more like entertainment, right? Something about a Martian or something about some conspiracy theory, this or that. It existed alongside a whole range of credible journalistic institutions. What's happened in Web 2.0 is our largest single source of media that connects people, nearly 3 billion now, is essentially a National Enquirer. And that is very disabling for democracy. That's very disabling for collaboration. That's very disabling for us to be able to function as citizens. When someone says, and I won't name names here, but politically, just flood the zone with disinformation and false information, and some people are disabled. They don't know what's truth and what isn't. We're paralyzed. We don't have an ability to actually function. And that's when I say we need a new social contract. We need to reestablish that trust. Never going to happen when you flood the zone with false information. So I think those are 2 examples, kind of categorically, of how things can change.
Okay, so just to connect, so now I'm seeing. I keep asking,
I hope you see it for longer.
Yeah, I think we're going to. So I keep thinking, but Frank, we currently use these 5 platforms. What will the replacements look like? And your answer was not what they'll look like. Your answer was, imagine a world in which we weren't flooded with garbage and fear.
Yeah, it's really important not to think of Web 3 and what I'm talking about as, okay, we can identify these large platforms that we have that are doing bad things. Let's go build another large platform and hope it's better. That's not what I'm saying. What Web 3 allows is a new, healthier architecture and ecosystem. So imagine if the Goliath gets replaced by 1,000 Davids. Okay, lots of activity, lots of new use cases which are being built on a new ecosystem which has a healthier architecture, right? Because our social graph now is something that we own and control. And it's a resource for society, as opposed to a resource for a few companies to decide how they're going to increase time online or advertising revenue, et cetera.
Got it. So it's more like, it's like America was conceived by some as a new Jerusalem, a founding of a new city on a hill. I'm sure I'm mixing up my sources and centuries here, but this is it. It's founding a new ecosystem which will be healthy and receptive for democracy. And within that, you can't say what apps will be built. And they're probably not going to look like the ones we have now, but there'll be other ways to collaborate and work together.
Yeah, and we're not talking about giving up the awesomeness of the internet, which is the connectivity and that possibility. But it's about building it in a healthier way, unleashing tremendous innovation, just like we did in telecom, and replicating everything we have in Web 2, in Web 3. I don't think we're going to give up the ability to get an answer to our question immediately, or shop and have something show up. But it will be, and then imagine the new applications and so on and so forth. I was just at a breakfast with someone, with Baratunde Thurston, and he really, he had a line. He said, he gave me permission to use it, so I'm going to use it. He said, you'll never have a thriving democratic system with autocratic technology. And that's fundamentally what we're talking about. We need a technology, and this is where decentralization actually supports democracy. It's actually very hopeful, because centralized technology is actually anti-democracy.
Great. Okay, so I hope you share this vision. Questions? We have about 10 or 12 minutes for questions. I'll start with, what's your name? Dahlia, please. Oh, let's see. Oh, yes, we'll have mics. And how many mics do we have in the room? Is it just the one? Or is there another one? Just the one. Okay, so we'll do two on this side, then we'll pass it over to that side. Go ahead.
Forgive me, I probably won't formulate this really well. Today, I saw on my phone, it's 15 years ago today, right? The anniversary of the iPhone and how that's changed.
Oh.
Listening to you and thinking about
Closer to the mic, please.
who would be threatened by your new vision, because there's habituation to the animosity and the autocracy, and all of the conspiracy mongering has become habitual in this country. So I wonder about, are you anticipating that, and how would people want to be weaned from something that has seemingly given them a lot of power that is undermining of democracy, but you'd have to convince them to want to be weaned?
Yeah, you need a migration. You know, in technology, people talk about adoption, right? We need commercial applications here that are useful to people, right? Because they have a set of apps that they use now. Think about it in terms of physical human migration. It requires two things. People need to be fed up with where they're living, and just it's not tolerable anymore, so I'm going to leave, and they need a place to go. So this new, alternative, decentralized social networking ecosystem needs to be built so people can go, and it needs to work as well or better than the current use cases that people have. That's really important. So commercial vitality is going to be what ultimately sustains this. Who will be against it? I can imagine, you know, when who was against changing rules around tobacco? Mm-hmm. You know, incumbents are the ones that are going to be most against it. By the way, which is why our project is transatlantic. So we're getting really great traction on this project in Europe. We actually launched the Institute, which is the governance track, in Paris, with right in the heart of the left bank, in the campus of Sciences Po, because in Europe, their regulatory environment, their policy objectives, GDPR, and now DMA and DSA, the new ones that have just been passed, are very consistent with what I'm talking about in terms of having the technology enable those policies. They will tell you, even privately though, they know the regulations won't solve the problem. We need innovation consistent with the regulations to solve the problem.
Yeah. And I can add on, almost everyone is exhausted with the current regime. When I published this article in The Atlantic, I expected people to attack me because I criticized both sides. Overwhelmingly, people are exhausted. They want change. They hate the current technological and social ecosystem.
And I think the shift that's required is one moving from recycling on the problem to solutions. I think that's really important. We need to focus on a way forward that's more hopeful. And this is my test case. Right? Because when we first met, there was not a lot of hope. You know, just reminded of one story. When I was walking around Washington Square with Jonathan, I was reminded of the very first project we did in 2019 or 18, whatever it was actually the beginning of something we called Unfinished, which was not a tech thing. It was just like, what's going on? Let's crowdsource questions around the world. One question: what's your biggest concern right now? And the one that really stuck in my mind was a group of high school kids from the Bronx who showed up in Washington Square, put a big placard up that said, "Is tech our undoing?"
Okay, next question. And we'll have to keep the questions brief, and we'll try to keep our responses brief. A lot of people have questions. Go ahead.
Jonathan, could you just, specifically for you, you have been very famously pessimistic about the impact of social media on democracy. What are you seeing here that makes you more optimistic?
So there are so many ways that social media is undercutting our ability to live and work together. One of the biggest ones is actually the devastation it's doing to teenagers. And I believe we have to keep them off these toxic platforms until they're through with puberty, at least until they're 16 years old. And everyone says, how are you going to do that? They're just going to lie. And imagine, first of all, that the platforms were not nearly so toxic. imagine that Instagram goes away because there are these much healthier places. So that's the first thing, is things would be less toxic. And now that with the blockchain technology, you could do age verification instantly, effortlessly. It's no problem. So in Frank's world, the teen mental health problem is very, very solvable. And just on and on about different mechanisms. So since my diagnosis was that Web 2, I didn't have the language for it, but Web 2 platforms are what changed parameters between 2009 and 2012 and put us on this downward path. I mean, of course, we were on a downward path before, but it wasn't so steep. So this is at least hope that we can pull out of the, the nosedive and, get a little altitude here and give us some time to work. Thanks. Okay, so I called on that woman first, and then we'll go to you. You had your hand, but I called you first. I know you've been very persistent, so I will pass it to you. But yeah.
Hi. My question is, I think Web3 is here. There's a lot of infrastructure development, a lot of application development being done right now. There's even one protocol, Ocean, that lets you, it's open source, and it lets you, individuals and businesses store and sell their data, with their own defined protocols. But what I'm seeing right now reminds me exactly of where we were in the early stages of the .com era. And I was involved in that deeply with IBM for a long time. And it seems like there's going to be a huge shakeout, and there's going to be some survivors, and where Web3 is going, it's still a little unclear to me who's going to be the winners and losers. And I just wonder what your opinion was on that.
Yeah, unclear to me as well. I think it's...
Okay, bring them. This woman has had her hand up, so we'll give it to her next. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so a point I should have mentioned that I didn't, and thank you for asking the question. DSNP is not tokenized. It's not a blockchain protocol. It's a core internet protocol like HTTP. So it gets the internet to work differently, so blockchain works differently. Winners and losers, I don't know, but I know there will be both, right? And I just think it's important, like you're doing, to focus on the technology, not the use cases. And, you remember pets.com? Okay? A domain name that was at one point worth $1 billion. It wasn't anything but a domain name. That's the silliness of the early stages. But let's not be confused by the silliness, which is the most of the narrative has been driven by these dodgy cryptocurrencies and so forth, and just stay focused on the tech. And let's not let the tech take us. There's a great Vietnamese, a Buddhist philosopher, and I was just reading his book when I was flying here, and he went by the name of Tay, but his full name, I think, is Thich Nhat Hanh, and some of you may know him. And he has a great quote about all this. He said, it's the story of the man galloping on the horse. And as the man's going through the crossroads, somebody says, where are you going? And he said, wherever the horse takes me. And he said, that's what technology is doing for society right now.
Yeah. Okay, how much time do we have left? Bring it up. 5 minutes. Okay, so the question here, and then we'll pass it to the back.
Okay, so this is on the tech side. Who's going to own the pipes? And does the existing devices that we have port to this new framework?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because we talk about layer 0 blockchains and the stack up. There's also a stack below, which is the telecom stack, and how all this stuff moves around, right? By the way, we chose a layer 0 blockchain called Polkadot because it was particularly supportive of large-scale social media. And I was in Davos a month ago, and we were going to choose them anyway. But what was particularly encouraging to me is that the Web3 Foundation and Polkadot came out as partners in Project Liberty, and Gavin Wood, who some of you probably heard the name, he started Ethereum, and now Polkadot is this new project, has endorsed DSNP. So that was very cool for us and very, very validating. As far as your point about the infrastructure, all of the stuff below what enables the internet is going to continue to evolve and build, kind of the hard piping, the stuff that's in the basement, so to speak. The new things that are going to be built with blockchain are going to be super interesting. I wouldn't focus as much, though, on the hardware or even the software. I'd focus on the data. And who owns the data is going to be really the key in the future, because your data has value. And blockchain enables you to realize that value.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to do 2 questions in the back, and then we'll have to stop. So I guess this fellow here who's right next to you, and then we'll pass it over to, I guess, the guy in the back there with the white shirt will be next. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so my question is about the quality of information. So in that
Where is he?
Over
right here.
on the aisle.
Hi.
So in that pre-internet world of the New York Times and the National Enquirer, the media industry was somewhat anti-democratic, but there were gatekeepers like the editors at the New York Times who controlled the quality of the information, which had a positive effect on society. Where will the quality control come in Web 3.0?
Well, the quality control for all of this needs to come from us, right? It's not like somebody else is going to do it. So if it's a media use case, the quality control has to come from the people who are actually standing that up and building that. The point is, we as users will be able to discern and say, this is the National Enquirer. It might be entertaining. We're not going to take it seriously. This other is where I'm willing to put my time and energy and maybe even share my data. Okay? And so there's not a magic algorithm or a magic piece of technology that's going to make things better, as I said before, right? It's a set of values that we bring to this. In Project Liberty, we've talked a lot about tech, and the tech is super interesting because it's doing a lot of damage. Project Liberty is not a tech project. What differentiates it is it's coming forward with a solution, which is a tech-founded solution, and it has 3 tracks. In addition to tech, it's the movement and governance. So in this area of governance is where you find richness in terms of having people that really understand how systems work, understands how governance works, understands how human behavior works, psychology, behavioral economics, ethicists, lawyers, policymakers need to be in this conversation now, because the tech is happening now. And the technologists doing it, what we did last time was someone in a T-shirt got to stand by a whiteboard and decide how it should work for us. This time around, we actually have to get people together, a greater number of people, and say, this is how it must work for us, and tell the technologists, you can go have at it and innovate, but within this framework.
Right, but Frank, his question was, if there are not going to be as many editors or gatekeepers or hierarchical institutions, how will we get quality? And I think your answer was, it sounded like it might be, well, people will vote for quality, which sounds like popularity, which sounds like people are going to basically go for the National Enquirer or whatever's entertaining. Have you thought about, as our founders thought about, if pure democracy, putting it up to vote for the people, you're probably not going to like the results. So are there ways that you can have decentralized quality, not just popularity? Because popularity is going to be humor, sex, and outrage.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. This is where, for me, the governance track becomes in, and the conversation about wrestling those very issues to the ground. Again, I want to be clear here. I don't want to be here pretending I have all the answers. That's not I don't. I don't. What we do have is an idea. What we do have is a possible solution. And by the way, if there's a better one, we'll support that one.
Yeah.
We have a problem that needs a solution. I believe we need to stop recycling around the problem and start focusing on the solution.
Yeah, and further to that point, there'll be many fewer bad actors, because right now anyone can make a fake website that looks authentic, and in this world there'll be much more authenticity, so there will be at least fewer bad actors and it'll be harder to exploit.
A really important point. So when you think of DSMP, and I didn't want to get too much into the weeds on this, but there are 3 core attributes that we've prioritized. One is self-sovereign ID. The second is verifiable attributes, and the third is privacy, right? So think about this in the analog world, pre-technology. We can only be one person in the analog world. Sometimes people try to be more than one person. When discovered, they're punished, right? We, as a society, we don't view that favorably. Verifiable attributes. People have resumes. They apply for jobs. If somebody finds out you lied on your resume, you get fired, right? Privacy. In the analog world, we share more information the closer and smaller the circle. You know, with our intimate relationships, we don't share all of our information with strangers. Think of technology working in the same way, where you can only be one person online. You can't be a machine and bots and just spewing information out. Secondly, there's third-party verification, like you said earlier, age, or whatever the criteria is for, for voting, for this, for that. That can be verified in this new world. And privacy is really important. You can actually now, the technology is available to be able to control what you share if you own and control the data, and with whom you share it. So you don't share everything with strangers, and you're more comfortable sharing more in trusted environments. So if that app is not a trusted environment, you're not going to share information with it. Most people won't.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm being flashed and flagged by digital and analog reminders that we are out of time. Now, so let me just say, if you want more information, just go to projectliberty.io. What's the web address?
Projectliberty.io, not to be confused with projectliberty.com, which is a copycat. Okay. .io.
Okay, or just Google projectliberty.io, and especially to the people who had their hands up we didn't get to, I encourage you, please come on up, just ask me and Frank, ask Frank your questions right afterwards. And for the rest of you, I hope the clouds have parted a little bit, and you have a little bit more hope about the future in 5, 10, 15 years, and thank you for...
Yeah, thank you very much for your time.